At the academy, it was said that only half of the students would make it to the second year, and those who managed to graduate at all were considered fortunate. Finishing late was not viewed as an achievement, it was regarded as a miracle. On the very first day, during the initial test, the professor made the rules clear. The students had 20 minutes to complete the task, or they would be expelled on the spot. Panic spread as everyone rushed to solve the problem, but the level of rune knowledge required was far beyond what most of them could handle. Then, suddenly, a sheet of paper was torn clean in half. Krista Warden, known as the most promising genius of her generation, could only watch as her chance of passing disappeared. She initially believed it had been her own mistake, or perhaps that the wind had carried it away. However, she did not realize that someone in the room had deliberately sabotaged her. The boy sitting beside her, Rain, quietly observed the flow of mana and traced it back to its source. The magic used was wind, silent and invisible. His gaze shifted to the true culprit, a blonde prodigy seated a few rows ahead, smiling as though nothing had happened. With only 8 minutes remaining, Krista began rewriting everything from the beginning, her hands trembling as she worked frantically. In desperation, she told Rain to hand over his paper so she could copy his answers, but he refused, pulling it away. He explained that her current method would not work in time. When she questioned how he could be so certain without even trying, he calmly replied that the problem was still solvable, but her approach required too much time. Without hesitation, Rain took the pen and began solving the problem himself. Before they could even stand to submit their work, the blonde student moved first. It was Hubert, the Academy's runner-up genius and the pride of Rohim Academy, the same person who had used invisible wind magic to tear Krista's paper, believing no one had noticed. Confidently, he placed his answers on the professor's desk as if he had already won. The professor cast an analysis spell, examining the runes and checking the response time. He remarked that the solution was not bad, but far from impressive. According to him, a problem of that level should have taken no more than 2 minutes. He assigned Hubert a grade C. Unable to accept the result, Hubert protested. He insisted that he had finished first and had used the correct formula. In response, the professor casually mentioned the use of wind magic, revealing that he had been aware of the sabotage all along. Hubert's face immediately went pale. At that moment, Rain stepped forward and handed in his paper. The professor laughed and remarked that it was unfortunate that they had finished, as he had been looking forward to expelling them. Rain simply stated that anyone who could not use magic because of something as minor as a light breeze did not deserve to be called a mage. The professor took the paper and examined it closely. The magic circles were unusual, not incorrect, but unconventional. One was drawn in a fan-shaped form, while the other followed a standard structure, something no one typically did. Curious, the professor asked for an explanation. Rain explained that the configuration worked better with the water attribute. He added that if the rune requirements were satisfied using a simple first-degree equation, the acceleration time would activate. The professor was impressed that a regular student even understood such theory. However, he pointed out that knowing something in theory was very different from executing it in practice. He then told Rain to prove it. As Rain began casting, the professor watched with anticipation, expecting him to fail and his confidence to collapse. Instead, the papers began to glow. A flash appeared, resembling a cluster of condensed mana, and moments later, rain began falling inside the classroom. The entire room fell silent. After a brief pause, the professor began to clap slowly. In his 13 years of teaching, he had seen many talented students, but never anything like that. He gave Rain a grade S. Rain showed no reaction. He simply walked past Hubert and warned him that next time he would not let it slide. This left one question: how had a student with no known credentials managed to humiliate the top prodigies of the 8 great schools on his very first day? To understand that, one had to go back 300 years to the tallest magic tower in the Empire.
300 years ago, in the tallest magic tower of the Empire, there lived a boy who had no interest in the world beyond his books. His name was Lin, the youngest mage in history to reach 4 stars. An orphan from the slums, he had been taken in and left in a tower filled with endless knowledge, and from that moment on, he never stepped outside. The world meant nothing to him. His entire existence revolved around a single goal: reaching the 7th circle, a level rumored to reveal the very truth of the world itself. He devoted himself completely to that pursuit until the day everything changed. A silver-haired girl suddenly walked into his library. She called his name once, then twice, then a 3rd time, yet he ignored her every attempt. Instead of leaving, she teased him, mocking him as someone too timid to even face her. Even when he responded with a threat, conjuring a fireball in irritation, she didn't flinch. Moments later, she stumbled back into a bookshelf, sending a cascade of books crashing down on top of her. And for the first time in years, Lin smiled. Her name was Esther. She was not an ordinary warrior. Her body had been artificially modified, her lifespan shortened as a result. She knew she would not live long, and rather than run from that fate, she chose to face it head-on. She had decided to gather companions and save the world before her time ran out. When Lin asked her if there was anything worthwhile, anything enjoyable about such a reckless mission, she met his gaze without hesitation and gave a single answer: the world. He did not join her out of heroism, nor out of any desire to save others. He joined because for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar: curiosity. What followed was a group unlike any other. Each member stood at the very peak of their respective fields, an unstoppable force bound together by a shared purpose. And among them, despite being the youngest, Lin possessed a talent that set him apart from them all. For a time, they laughed together, fought together, lived as though nothing could ever break them. But that kind of story never ends without a cost. During their final battle, Lin was struck by a rare abyssal poison, one that had no cure, no treatment, and no hope of survival. Yet even then, he refused to accept death. In a desperate act, he carved an immortality seal into his own heart, freezing his body in time. The spell would only be undone once his body was fully healed, something that could take years, decades, or even centuries. As his body turned cold and still, he made a promise. He told Esther that he would return. And as she held his hand, watching him slowly fade into a frozen state, she made a promise of her own. She would wait for him, no matter how long it took. All Lin had ever wanted was to reach the 7th circle, to uncover the truth of the world. But fate had other plans. 300 years later, a boy named Rain opened his eyes in a different body. As he stepped into a public square, his gaze fell on 4 towering statues. They were figures he recognized instantly, people he had once fought beside, laughed with, shared meals with. Beneath each statue were names, and beneath those names were dates of death. In that moment, the truth became undeniable. Rain was not just another student who had gotten lucky on an exam. He was Lin, the very same mage who had once stood at the pinnacle of magic, the creator of the formulas now taught in classrooms, a figure once revered across the world as the Saint Mage. And yet, he could not tell a single soul. Later, after class, Krista called him over. When Rain asked what she wanted, she hesitated, clearly embarrassed. After a brief pause, she thanked him for what he had done earlier. He responded with a straight face, asking her to repeat himself, claiming he hadn't heard. Her face immediately flushed red. Annoyed, she told him not to make things more awkward than they already were. She added that she would repay him eventually, warning him not to get arrogant, because above all else, they were still rivals. As she pointed at him in frustration, a group of students passed by, gossiping about Professor Owen awarding an S grade. At first, they assumed it had gone to Hubert, but another quickly corrected them. It had actually been given to Krista, which to them made perfect sense. They also mentioned that during the paired test, she had been partnered with a well-known academic genius. The next day, Rain approached Krista again, casually reminding her of her promise to repay him. He then asked which floor the girls' dormitory was on. She shot back that based on his entrance exam score, his own room was probably on the top floor. She added that she had already warned him not to stand out too much. Her tone carried a hint of irritation, but beneath it, there was something else she couldn't quite hide.